Hi, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. It's me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and thank you for listening. Really appreciate it as always. Should be an interesting podcast. It's the last one for 2022, which is really nice to have it on track, and it's also really nice to be heading into a bit of a break period with Christmas just around the corner. So it should be a nice time to put my feet up and get a bit of sunshine down here in Melbourne, Australia. It's the heart of our it's heading in towards the heat period for us in our summer period. So it's always nice to get my toes wet in the water, having a surf and catching up with some friends for a few cold ales and just having a bit of a rest. So that's all coming up. But anyway, this podcast is going to be an interesting one for you. There's a few things, obviously, continuing along the Japanese thread, which should be really interesting, this one. There's a lot that I've picked up in my notes that I'd forgotten about, to be honest, that I do subconsciously and never really looked at the origins of it. So that's coming up. I'm going to talk about fundamentals of design. Got another couple of interesting ones for you with that. Pattern and contrast that we'll kick that one off with. But also start with talking about the Bonsai Support Network, which I think is crucial for all of us, for not only our personal development but the development of our bonsai. So I'll have a bit of a yak about that too. So strap yourselves in; should be an interesting one. And thanks for sticking around. Righto, so the Bonsai Support Network. I was musing to myself about things that I enjoy. You know, heading towards this Christmas break period and the year's starting to get ready to wrap up for 2022. The bonsai year has been great. It's been really, really enjoyable this year. I've loved it. Going full-time bonsai professional has been a dream and finally been achieved now, and I haven't looked back, to be honest, which is good for me especially, but also good for what I can offer back to the bonsai community. Obviously, you would have noticed it with these podcasts ramping up and the frequency increasing and that sort of stuff. So I don't intend to change that going into the new year, which is great. And I was thinking about what I've really enjoyed or where I've got real strong benefit and how I could possibly offer some advice or some insight, I suppose, to how other people can be as content as I am with my bonsai and push things a bit further. And I was thinking all about, my involvement with different clubs and presenting and workshops and training and a group of mates that I message with as well outside of all that about bonsai, and it really it sparked something to me saying, well, really, you've got almost a support network. So, and I think that the Bonsai Support Network is, for me, has been critical for me advancing and developing the way that I want to, and also taking leaps forward. And I thought that, I think for anyone that's listening to this podcast, your support network, whether you set it as a support network or not, is crucial, and that can come in the shape of loved ones. That encouragement that you get, you show them a tree you've designed and, oh, that's great. They might not understand everything that's gone into it or the 15 years planning that's happened to get it to that point, which doesn't matter. That doesn't, you're not doing it for kudos, you're doing it because you love it. So I think that if you sort of have those people in your corner, which is what I feel I've got, it really, really does encourage you and brings you along for the journey, and your friends. And I think that I've talked about it before. Bonsai clubs are great. I think that they're a real good source of fellow enthusiasts that we can sort of lean on and seek advice from and whatever. I do reiterate that I think your bonsai journey should be about consistency and not chopping and changing. So taking advice, but even just having that contact with other people that love these little trees, I think that's really positive and should be something that you open yourself up to and allow yourself to become part of. I think that's going to be good for you to, maybe you don't always agree with things, you don't necessarily like stylings or whatever it is, but I think it's still positive for you. And I think a mentor, having someone that you can lean on quite heavily for stuff is great, and that mentor can be someone that you meet through the bonsai clubs, or someone that you know of, or whatever it is. I think that mentor can provide a rudder to your ship. It can that person, he or she can keep you on the straight and narrow, and also provide inspiration to you. And I think the inspiration part is a big part of this Bonsai Support Network, in that sometimes you sort of get a bit flat with things with bonsai, because sometimes you can think, oh, it's never changing, especially if you've only got a few bonsai. Like it can be a source of frustration. I think that you want things to change, but they take forever, and it's taking so long for this to grow, or there's no bud happening here. But I think that the network, or the mentor especially, can be someone that goes, hey, hang on a minute, remember, just wait till next spring, let's see what happens here, or provide some kind of hope to you. There's no bud growing there, that's great, but what about if we did a thread graft, or what if we did this, or what if we did that? I think, or maybe a redesign, a restyle, maybe that fresh pair of eyes looking at a tree, saying, no, well, let's change the front from here to here, and then problem solved. And I think that sort of support network can be great, and it shouldn't cost you anything to get it, bar your time and someone else's time. And you can also be that person for someone else as well. As part of your network, you can provide that positivity and that inspiration, or that fresh set of eyes. And there's no point sitting in a corner going, wow, my bonsai, no good. Next year, no, I'm going to get rid of them. Don't enjoy them. Not having fun with them anymore. I think that if you can reach out to fellow enthusiasts, and I'm not saying get 4,000 people in your support network. Really, it's a small handful of people that you can sort of maybe start a chat group up with, or have a bit of a laugh, or just stay in touch with. And when you get along to the monthly club meetings or something like that, take some photos on your phone. Hey, what do you reckon about this? What would you do? And people are more than happy over a cup of tea to have a yarn and give you their 2 cents worth as to what they think should happen with your trees. Ultimate decision always rests with you, but I think it's always nice to sort of to get those ideas and ask for advice. And also, really importantly, it's great to have fun and have a laugh. Bonsai should be something that connects us to a network, but the network can be so much more than just trees in pots and techniques and styling advice. It can be an opportunity for you to have a bit of a laugh and lighten the load a little bit. It's a social thing as well as a dedicated horticultural and
artistic pursuit that we have. So I think that we can also lighten it up a little bit as well, and they can your network can be something that reignites your passion. I think that's really what I'm trying to get to, is that it should be something that, whether it's something that just makes you get out there and water your trees, or just makes you fertilise them, or, makes you want to get out the wire cutters and remove the wire, or whatever it is. It's just something to sort of push you along and sort of encourage you and say, yeah, come on, great job, you're doing good. Let's keep going with this. This is a long-term thing. This is a forever thing. Let's just keep taking steps in the right direction. And I think that, it can be really, really positive and something that you should actively look to build. So Japan, getting back to the first trip, the saga. It feels like a bit of a saga when it's dragging out like this on the podcast, but trust me, the time went so fast when I was over there, and I was looking through my notes, and it was around day 4, day 5, something like that. So it's really, really quick into the trip, and I wrote this section called "What Did I Learn?" and there was some really, really key things that were shown to me and taught, that I picked up and absorbed over that really short first period. And I can see from my writing that I was really excited about stuff, because it was a bit scrappy, trying to get things down on paper at the last minute before I could try and get some sleep. But it was simple things like branch bending is better in winter, and the whole explanation for sap flow and whatever else. And it was like, I look at that and think, it's such a simple thing to write. Branch bending is better in winter, but it's massive. Like, that's a massive learning that I picked up only from there. That I'd done bonsai all this time, and no one had ever explained it to me or said, hey, this is when you should do it, because you go along to a workshop, and that can be in whatever time of the year it is that suits whoever's there running the workshop, and you say, I want my tree to look different and look pretty. then, sort of it's bent into a pretzel, and you go home and wonder why things die, or why, the top of the trunk's dead, or, they get this big dead patch on the trunk line itself. And it's like, well, the simple fundamental is that branch bending is better for major stuff during winter because there's less sap flow and the branches are more flexible. It's not hard. It's quite simple, but until someone tells you something, you don't know what you don't know. And the other thing was talking about branch structure, to expose the first section of a branch to give interest to the pad. It's like, well, that's massive as well. And I do it now subconsciously, and I hadn't actually thought about where I'd first heard that. And it was in these notes that I was looking back through from all that time ago in Japan that suddenly said to me, this is why I do things. And it was, like I said, it was really nice to go back and read it. The other thing was wiring. Wiring was the big thing I went there to try and learn properly. Good fundamental hardcore skill of wiring, and to get that as perfect as I possibly can. And I'm adamant now that good wiring is a key foundation to good bonsai. You can wire so it looks shocking and still have pretty much the same outcome as if you wire really well. But wiring really well is an art in itself. So there was things like one wire goes clockwise, the other wire goes anti-clockwise, like the old Mr. Miyagi wax on, wax off sort of thing. And I was explained to me why that works when the wire locks, when it changes direction. And I like I said, that's part of my everyday life now, is that wiring technique that I was taught then. There's other things like pad shape and pad structure and sub-branch angles and taper over the entire tree, like, allowing, considering with my design, not only taper of the trunk, but also taper of the branches, which, if you listen to this podcast, I love taper. Taper's great. Taper adds so much interest to really highly refined bonsai that, you can have a nice pad structure. It looks really, really good with full of leaf during the growing season. The deciduous tree drops its leaves over winter. The first thing I look at is taper. First thing I look at is the structure of that branch, not just where the tips are and what it looks like from a visual distance, but getting up nice and close to it, looking at saying, okay, does the branch taper down? If I cut this back to a certain point, will that allow me to regrow a new bud, which means that I can get that natural flowing taper towards the tip of the branch? And I think that's really important. The other one was handling pines, how to work with Japanese black pine or any pine and not break needles. Instead of coming straight at the needle with your hands, where you break them and you push them, working from underneath and flowing up and out along the needles. So you're working with the flow of the needles, and you're not fighting the directional movement of those, or directional growing of the needles, where you put pressure on them and they break. And I was just explaining this the other day in a class about Japanese black pines that I was running, that if I'm working with a pine of any kind, or any tree really, and I can feel a spike or pressure on my hand, I stop straight away and think, you're doing it wrong. So rather than continuing to push harder and try and get into where I want to work, it's like, okay, stop, take your hand back, up, underneath, back through with the flow of the needles, with the directional growth of the needles, and then you'll get to that point. So it's a reminder for me that you don't want to cause any excess damage. You want to try and minimize the impact that you're having with the tree. And again, something simple like that came from the first couple of days in Japan. And the one big one that I picked up from this first little bit was, and this is really important, and I do this subconsciously now. I've used the line "good structure is good bonsai," but there was another one that I'd written a note on and underlined and highlighted from my time in Japan. This very, very short couple of days. Work on making the tree, not showing the tree. So you're doing it to build the structure for the future, to make it a beautiful bonsai somewhere down the track. You're not doing it to make it look pretty right now. And that's massive. For me, that is one of the key components to every single thing that I do with my bonsai. I always look at how can I improve this tree, not for now, because I know with time
and consistency, I will get a certain, get the tree to the best that I possibly can, and it will be a magnificent bonsai. It will be beautiful. We can all do that. But what can I do to it now to provide the base building blocks to get it to that point? And that's something which started way back when and changed me. It took the slate that I had where I'd had it drummed into me by going to workshops, by doing and seeing demos and hearing people talk, or even going to a bonsai show and looking at a really nice bonsai and not putting the pieces of the puzzle together to say, well, a 1,000-piece jigsaw starts with the first piece. It always has to. And you don't suddenly tip it out of the box and it's a finished project. It's something which takes a very long time, and you have to put it together piece by piece by piece with thought and process. And I hadn't had that drummed into my thick skull that's how good bonsai are built, is over a very long period of time. And it's not about rushing the process. It's not about putting all the pieces of the puzzle together in 3 minutes, going, yeah, there you go, that's done. Now I'll just put it on the bench and admire it like a beautiful painting on the wall. It's not how it works. It's, you go back to the very, very basics and you start building the process step by step by step. And that's, that was so different for me and to be honest, life-changing for me, considering where I'm at now with bonsai in my life, that going back to that point where, you do a 2-hour workshop. I'm sure everyone's listening to this feels, has got a similar sort of experience where you do a workshop with somebody and your expectation is to go into that workshop, or normally, I won't say all the time, but normally it's your expectation to go into that workshop and walk out with a beautiful bonsai. Whether it's a piece of garden stock you bought in a black tub, you want it cut, you want it wide, you want it shaped, you want it to look great and be a beautiful bonsai. Well, that's what sort of got stripped out of me with this initial part of Japan, is like, that can't be your focus. Your just ultimate desire is, yes, make it magnificent, but every time you work on it, you're just taking a few steps down the path to get there. And that path, you can be right at the end of the path, or you can be at the start of the path. And the way that you treat it and your vision, or the steps that you take, the work that you do on the bonsai at that time, it's very, very different. And that's the part that I've learned over time, is that knowing, and this comes with experience too, is, you look at a piece of material, you want to get it to be something that you think in the back of your head that I want it to look, like a magnificent tree like this or whatever it is. But it's okay, what steps do I take right now to get it to that point? And I know it can be frustrating to look at it and go, well, really, all I've done is wire the key branches. Like, nothing's happened with the pads. Or I've got these long shoots still sticking out on certain branches, but other ones I don't. And I think that it's probably one of the most important things to consider, is that you do need to make sure that you are taking the right step at the right time to ensure that you are going to be on the right track to achieving goals with your bonsai. So after all those big couple of days, then I was given a really nice old Japanese white pine. To me, it was just magnificent. This thing, it was very old. It was had lots of work that was needed on it as well, and my basic instruction was up to you. Go for it. You do this. You apply what you've learnt, and we'll see how we go. So it was actually really good, and I remember to this point, like, there was major branch bending, there was trunk bending, there was lots of cleanup process with it as well. And to be honest with you, it was probably the first time I'd worked on a really good white pine ever, because in Australia I just hadn't had exposure at that time to trees of that caliber, and it was almost it was definitely an honour to be trusted with a tree like that. So I had to put my back into it, and I remember I really, really did a lot of I was diligent and applying the techniques of wiring to get it right. And I remember thinking that it was, I just had to put so much thought into it and apply myself like I hadn't before to a tree.
and it was actually really nice to get that sort of intensity at that time, because it made me realise that, you know, you can learn the skills, you can build your base from something, and if with the right application, you can learn anything you apply yourself to, you can learn and you can make better. And I found at that time that was sort of like, right, bonsai's right in that category. Like there's things with the artistic side which are really unique, but the mechanical processes that we all use, you know, wiring and is one of them, pruning, cleaning, all that sort of stuff, that's consistently the same for all of us. So we can learn that stuff and we can apply it correctly and be very similar in how we do it. What we do after applying the techniques, the artistic side, that's different. That's something which I find very, very personal for all of us. But it is something that we can learn. And I remember at that time thinking, you know, if I keep learning this, if I keep, you know, not accepting second best, then I can get really good at this. I can become great at it. You know, I can sort of push myself harder and harder and make sure that I can do it to the very best of my skills to a really high standard. At that point, I wasn't at that. You know, I'm not saying after bloody 3 days in Japan I was brilliant at it, but I remember, and I've written down that, you know, just keep learning, just keep applying good technique. Don't accept second best. Don't settle for substandard wiring with any of your trees. Make sure that it's always to a really good level. And you know, I'm certain that when I came back, it still wasn't great. I'm not saying, you know, a little bit of a trip to Japan and suddenly presto, you've got everything you need in your kit bag to be brilliant. But it certainly put me on the right path, that I kept pushing myself harder and harder and harder to do it. So it's, you know, my notes are really clear on that. And also, you know, talked about things with this white pine, like branch angling, and making sure that your pad branches flow along the same direction rather than conflicting with each other, and not just, you know, going back to that whole thing, you know, make the tree, don't make it to show it. You know, build the structure on this tree and make sure that it all sort of flows together nicely. Work on the tree, and you know, I've made really clear there's all diagrams that I've got in there, and talks about the techniques of guide wires too. You know, I'd always thought in my mind that guide wires were big, heavy, thick wires that you use to drag a branch to a certain position, and then you put a bit of, you know, wire in between the two wires of the guide wire, and you spun it around to sort of, that was your anchor. That's how you pulled things down. But that's just not the case. You know, guide wires are very simple, easy, light wires that are used to pull down, and the twisting process has got nothing to do with bringing the branch down at all. It's you know, that's something for another time. But yeah, so getting back to this white pine, so I'd put my back into it, worked on it a couple of days. Really, I'll jump forward. There's some other things that happened in between, but I really worked hard on this tree, and I really, you know, did as good as I can. I still didn't get it right, and I still had to have corrections, obviously, with branch, and I still used it as a learning experience. But by the end of it, I was really proud. You know, I'd bent branches and split them, which I'd never done before, with correct techniques under supervision of the apprentices that were working there. But, you know, I'd done all these things to the tree that, you know, after all this time, you know, I was really happy with the result that came about. Then when it was tweaked by, you know, by Mr. Tanaka, the master, it just showed me that I'd still got a long way to go. They've still got a hell of a lot to learn, but that this tree that I'd started on and put some kind of work into looked, by the end of it, incredible, absolutely amazing. And, you know, I'd also found out that it was a tree that Mr. Tanaka's great-grandfather had planted and grown. And I'm glad that they told me that after I'd finished working on it, because I'm not sure that I would have had the courage to break branches and bend and even work on a tree that has that sort of a heritage to it. And there was another thing that I learned, that, you know, bonsai is generational. It continues on, and I thoroughly believe that to this very day, that, you know, what we do with bonsai now is not necessarily for us, but somewhere down the track, you know, generations, you know, great-grandkids, whatever it is, you know, whether it stays in your family or goes to another family and continues on, there's still going to be that legacy somewhere down the track. So that all came from that little
white pine, I suppose. Right about then, my bonsai pot obsession started as well. It was amazing. I remember walking around looking, when I first got there, being blown away by the trees that were sitting on the benches, and just, every day looking at them going, my goodness, this is like bonsai heaven. But then sort of, you circle around, you're 5 days in and you've looked at the same things, and then you start looking below the benches, and that's when I went, ooh, look at all those pots. They're amazing. Pull them out, have a look, see the patina on them, the age. It's like, wow. And there was thousands of these things stacked, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 deep, row after row after row, just pots everywhere. So it was like Christmas. You could sort of start looking at the one on the top and go, ooh, and then you move that and look at the one underneath. Oh my God. And then next one. And it was just like, wow, there is so much diversity and interest in these pots and age, so when I started looking then at the trees that were on top of the benches, I started looking at the pots that they were in as well, and looking at the comparison between the two and sort of making a connection going, oh, okay, so that tree's in that pot because of this, and I'd start looking at the structure of the tree and the movement of the tree, and then you'd start looking, at maybe the, the size of the trunk or the power that the bonsai held, and I'd look at the pot and go, well, okay, well, that sort of pot works well with that tree because of this feature in the design. And then I'd be looking at the pots underneath going, and I'd play this sort of game with myself where I'd be looking at the pot going, what sort of tree would fit in that pot? Because some of them are very unusual. Some have big lips, some have, nice rounded edges, some have big feet on them, different colours, whatever it is. There was always something where I'd go, well, I would put, a flowering prunus, a plum tree in that because, and then I'd go, well, that colour with that sort of embellishment with, an old prunus in there with the nice flowers in spring, it would look great, and I'd be looking at all the pots. So I was very fortunate that I was able to start buying some of these bonsai pots, and I've written notes with, again, highlighted, underlined, exclamation marks, that I was able to buy antique Japanese pots that are over 100 years old, and it was just, for me, I was just blown away. Maybe it was naive, having not had access to this stuff before, but this is my journey, not anyone else's. So I remember just being like a kid in a candy shop. Can I buy any of these pots? It's like, no, you can't buy any, but you have a look, see which ones you like, and then we'll talk about it, and we'll see. We'll see if it's for sale or if it's not, if it's got to go back. And yeah, sure, there was some I picked up that were like, no, put it back. That's not going anywhere. That one's staying there. But there are others that I pick up and they go, yeah, cool, okay. They'd explain to me about the maker, how old it was, and then we talk about type of trees to go in and stuff like that. And so it wasn't just like going to a retail outlet where you'd sort of pick up a pot, go to the counter and say, here's my money, I'm out of the door. It was a whole experience, just added to the wealth of emotion and feeling that I got from going to Japan. Was pots really that day took a whole nother turn for me, which I'd seen nice pots before, and I probably didn't appreciate them anywhere near as much as I did that day when my eyes got open to the value of really good pots. And I'm not saying monetary value, I'm just talking aesthetic value when you consider the design, the artistic side of bonsai that we all work with. That there's horticultural considerations with a pot for the roots and for the tree, but there's also the strong artistic side that goes into it as well. And that day it was like a light bulb moment for me going, yep, okay, now the game's just stepped up another level, and I clearly need to start saving more money to put it into pots because you get what you pay for, and I'm a great believer in that still to this day, that good pots do cost good money because there's been a lot of skill put into it, not just by the person who's selling the pot, but the person who's actually made the pot. You're not going to a retail outlet getting these things that have been mass produced and cost you $3. These things have had a lot of skill and heritage put into them. From someone that's learned a trade for a very long period of time,
you're not just getting the pot, you're getting all those years and generations in a lot of circumstances, generations of knowledge that have been passed down to make that one simple pot that you're going to put your bonsai in. And you've got to pay for that, and you should be excited about paying for that, because we need all that stuff in the bonsai community. So I'd written notes also about dinner there and my experience with lots of things. It was great, but that night something really big happened as well. That I got told we were going to go to another nursery the next day, to Journ, and that's where Mr. Tanaka, who's the owner of the master at HEN, that's where he did his apprenticeship, and he's also married to the daughter of the chief at Journ. So it was actually really nice and they're part of the same family, part of the same bonsai family. So it was actually like a real privilege for me to be able to go to Journ. And I knew that was coming the next day, and also got told that things were starting to happen for preparations to go to Kokofu with the movement of trees and, being involved in the back end of it. So I remember that that night that I was super excited. It was like a little kid before Santa comes. That I remember thinking, this is seriously going to be like a dream. Who lives in Melbourne, Australia, and gets to do this stuff. It's just mind blowing. So I was very, very, very lucky. So the next day we got up and we loaded the van with trees for the sale area and for a tree to go on display at Kokofu from HEN, and we drove to Journ, and it was about 40 minutes a trip, I suppose, thereabouts from where I was staying, and there was 13 trees that were going to be put on show that were loaded into the van, and there's heaps of trees for the sale area and lots of other items, and it was I got to walk around Journ and look at the trees, and it's just I remember being blown away by the actual calibre of the trees. Not from the point of view that, like I used to have, where I would think, I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to get my trees to this level. I am never going to achieve this. I went there thinking, maybe things. If I play my cards right, if I apply myself, if I really, as I say, put my back into it and really focus and work hard, then maybe I can put some trees on a path to achieving this. They may never achieve it in my lifetime, but I can certainly put trees on a path to get to this level. And you walk around and you see the tags on the trees and the important trees that are registered. That you look at them and think, wow, wouldn't it be nice to actually have a tree like that? And that's why I suddenly thought too about what we do in Australia and at a local level with the clubs and the shows and that sort of thing, and my whole focus for that changed as well to be around preparing trees for these shows to get to the level, like these things that are going to this amazing show in Japan. They weren't prepared 2 days out from the show. They weren't given a final cleanup and that'll do, she'll be right, no worries, let's put it in the show. They were prepped for a very long period of time. So much thought goes into the planning for these things, so they're at their actual peak condition. Think about an Olympian that goes to compete. They don't just suddenly start training a week out from the event. They train for years and years and years to get themselves and their bodies physically and mentally to the point where they can compete at the ultimate level, and the competition is just like a peak of what they're capable of. So I think that very much became my renewed focus at that point, was that you've got to work hard to achieve these things. This is not close your eyes, make a wish, and it'll be okay. It's you need to plan these things. You need to really build the tree. and then when it's ready, then you prepare it for the show. You don't jump to the show. You prepare the tree to get to that point. So after loading up, prepping for the move, I got told that the next day we'd be leaving and heading to Tokyo to head up to the show, which was very exciting, very much something to look forward to. And so we had a bit of downtime, and I actually used the time to speak to Mr. Tanaka about field growing and techniques for putting trees in the ground and lifting out. So I got a heap of information on field growing and stuff that I'd read about and whatever. But then I got to see trees that had been through that process and years ago, long time ago, but sort of see how things change and why things were done, which to me, it's sort of like build a whole picture for me. So that was really invaluable. But I'll finish up on Japan now for this podcast. But the next segment, which will come in the new year, was one of the most incredible, amazing days of my entire life when it came to bonsai. So it'll be talking about staying the night at Journ in a room full of Japanese bonsai professionals, and being woken up in the middle of the night and driving like a bat out of hell to Tokyo in the middle of the night with snow coming down at a rapid rate around us. So very, very exciting. But I'll get to that one next time. So design fundamentals. We're sort of coming to the end of these. There should be only a couple more episodes with the design fundamentals, but I think again it's important to cover off on this stuff. And the one that I really want to focus on today, we're going to talk about pattern a little bit later, but this one I really like with bonsai is contrast. And when I started to think about this, it's like, okay, contrast, how does that work how do I apply the design fundamental of a contrast to how I work with bonsai and my trees? And I walk around my yard. That's pretty much how I do it. I think up the concept and then go, right, so how do I apply it without actually saying to myself, all right, you're designing a tree, think about contrast. How does it fit in? And it was an easy one first. I started looking at pots. Love pots, as I just mentioned, but I was looking at the colour of the pot to contrast the colour of the trunk, which was an easy one. I was like, yeah, cool. Okay, I can see that. I can see why I've done that. And I look at trees that I love, not just and when I say love, it's I love them all equally. It's like kids, but when I go through and think, which one do I particularly get drawn to at this particular time? They're the ones that I look at and go, okay, let's break this down and think about, why am I drawn to this tree? Obviously, there's, it might be the foliage, it might be some point of interest at the time. But then when I think about it in the terms of contrast, I'll look at it and think, well, okay, where does contrast kick in here? And often foliage color contrasts with the trunk, which is, hey, nothing to do with me. That's the bonsai gods that sort that one out. But I do love particular trees that have that contrast. For instance, I've got an amazing white pine in my collection that I just love. The thing's got everything about a bonsai that just makes me, melt. And when I look at this thing, the colour of the bluey green foliage compared to the aging bark with a bit of grey and brown in it, the two just look beautiful. And then I've got it in a lovely pot as well, a rough finish stone coloured pot, grey stone colour, and the whole tree sort of balances off really, really nicely. And that contrast between the foliage colour to the pot, really on that one, it made me go, yeah, there it is. That's why I love it. When I repot this tree, I don't ever think about changing the pot. I don't ever think, oh yeah, well, I would look at that pot for that tree, because I think it's when it gets that perfect balance between the two, then I stick with it. I don't change it, because it's about me. and it's what I want to look at, and it makes me stop when I'm having my morning coffee, walking through there, having a look at it, and without a word of a lie, and this isn't just because I'm doing this podcast. I was up this morning at 6 a.m., grabbed myself a coffee nice and early. We're in daylight savings here, so it's nice and bright really early, and I love early mornings, around the trees. Walk out there, and I just want to do some work on the sprinkler system on this particular white pine, and I got to see it again this morning. So I was I'd planned to talk about it in the podcast with the recording today, but I'd already been out there, blowing out sprinkler lines, clearing some blockages, and working on it. But I got to see this tree nice and early this morning, and again, it makes me stop. It makes me smile. It makes me want to spend time with it. And contrast is a massive one. The other thing with contrast too is, I've got some fruiting trees at the moment, and the colour of the fruit as it ripens and turns that orangey red. I'm thinking particularly about this Japanese plum that I've got against the reddy colour of the plum. We only leave one or two on the tree. I don't leave a lot on there, but that contrast between the colour of that to the colour of the foliage being, bright, vibrant green to the dark brown trunk to the beautiful blue glazed pot that it's in, like the contrast between them really draws you in as a viewer to tell a story. And I think that's something that we can all use, whether you do it subconsciously, like I said earlier, or whether you target it deliberately. And sometimes you have to think into the future, like, when you're selecting a pot for, say, a prunus, a flowering tree, a fruiting tree, or it might be an azalea or a camellia or whatever it is, you've got to think about the end game and what point you want to see that combination as perfect. Doesn't mean it needs to be a finished design or anything like that. It just means that you've got to pick the timing to say, okay, well, when this is in flower, the flower colour is going to be whatever it is, and when that happens, what pot should I put it in to contrast that, to really make those flowers explode? Like, if it's got pink flowers, would you put it into a pink pot? You might complement it quite nicely. And the contrast might be with the darkened trunk and the green leaves, or would you pick something that's more toned down and go for an unglazed dark brown pot? So when those flowers pop, they explode. Is that the sort of contrast that you want? And that's the vision that you have to have. Not necessarily to say the tree's magnificent, it's finished design. It's like, okay, well, it's got 5 branches on this tree. There's going to be 5 flowers on it. What do I want to do with it? And it's your choice as the artist to pick that contrasting design in your design to make sure that it's going to give you the desired result that you want. Then I started going a bit further into this with contrast, thinking, well, okay, what about another species? Like how do you get contrast in other species? And the one that that spoke to me the most was my junipers, where you look at them, or I look at the junipers, and they have deadwood, they have the gins on them, or they have shari, the dead trunk. And, I've got the contrast between the foliage colour to the pot. I stick with unglazed pots for them. So I've got this one that I'm thinking of, a nice old juniper. It's got beautiful green foliage against a grey unglazed deep pot, sort of contrasts nicely. But then there's a massive shari, so a lot of the trunk is dead with a live vein off it, and the live vein's been cleaned, so the live vein's got a red appeal to it. The deadwood's been lime sulphur, so it's got that white contrast. So the contrast between living and dead on my junipers is something that I love, that I get drawn into them as well. And there's arguments about whether you should remove bark on junipers or whether you should leave it there to flake up, and that's an individual choice. And in my collection, I have both, so I can't say that I'm in one party or another. But I use, when I decide to do it with certain of my junipers, it's always to get that contrast between the living and the dead. The white stark nature of the gins compared to the red and the vibrant red that sort of explodes on the juniper trunk, and the bright green foliage to show, hey, look, I've been through a rough patch, but really I'm doing great. you don't have to worry about me. I'm thriving. I'm doing so well. My live vein's swelling. It's got lovely colour in it. But, there's dead parts showing part of the past or the design element to the tree. And then the pot comes into it as well. So contrast is one of those ones that you might subconsciously do things, but it has a massive impact on the ultimate design and my personal desirability to spend time with my trees. So it's a big one. The other one is pattern. Pattern's a big one, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but I use pattern in many ways on the pots. Going back to pots, pattern in your pots can be something that you can use to complement or contrast a tree as well. Or bark patterns. Bark patterns was a big one that I've made big notes on, saying that's what draws me into some of the older pines that I have in my collection. Is that as the bark starts to plate up and starts to create a bit of a pattern about it, it always draws me in. Whenever I see them, even if I'm walking through a park and there's a beautiful big radiata pine there that's got a trunk that you can't wrap your arms around. It's enormous. But as I get close to it, I love looking at the detailed texture and pattern that the bark starts to form as these trees get older. And I remember it when I was in Japan, looking at the old pines that I'd never seen trees that old before in my life. And I looked at the bark, and the pattern was the one thing that really drew me in, because it's something which forms naturally, which you have zero input on as a bonsai practitioner. It's something that the tree itself produces, and I think that's one of the big ones that draws me in. I've also made a note here about patterns that get formed in pads. Because when I've made a note here saying a white pines pattern. So when I form a pad, it's sort of an outer layer to an inner layer to a higher layer, and the way you structure the foliage can be very specific in there. It's not random. It's very much a pattern that gets built to create a really nice pad structure. And so patterns form for the trees, and it might not be pattern might not be for your branch. I don't think you should necessarily have your pads placed themselves in a pattern so it's very uniform. You can if you want. It's up to you. It's your tree. But for me, I don't do that. But inside the pad itself, there's very much a pattern that I use or that I work with that helps me build a pad structure. So it's very much a pattern. And when I look at it from the top or from underneath, I can see that structure. From a distance, you see the volume, but when you get close and I'll study the structure of trees, I can see the pattern, and I appreciate it. I think that's something that I work with as well. All right, so that's it for another podcast and for 2022. See you later. That's it. 2022. Looking forward to 2023 because it's going to be an amazing year for all of us with our bonsai. I think that the bonsai world for me has never looked better, and I'm really excited. And I just want to reiterate that I think that from my approach, bonsai sometimes can be seen as intimidating or out of reach for a lot of people, and I'll never use any knowledge that I've got to isolate or intimidate anybody. It's an open door. It's a warm, welcoming embrace to anyone. And I'll always be welcoming. I'll always be understanding, and I'll always be helpful. And I strongly encourage that anybody that listens to this podcast that you're the same. Don't look down your snout at somebody, or don't turn your back on someone who's asking for help and guidance. Make sure that you're part of that bonsai support network. Make it that you don't have to be an expert. You can be at any point, but there's always someone that's got more to learn than what you do, and there's always something that you can provide. And don't make it that it's something that they regret. Patting you on the shoulder, saying, "Hey, buddy, can you help me? What do you think about this?" Be warm. Never isolate, never intimidate. That's not what we're about in bonsai. The bonsai world is so great because we're all in it. We're such a nice community. I've said this so many times, and I love it. So please reach out if you need any help or any guidance with anything through the socials. Just look up Bonsai Matsu. I'm sure you'll find me. There's more coming for YouTube, more coming for the podcast, and looking forward to a great 2023. So have a lovely Christmas in whatever form you enjoy it.
spend time with your trees, and make sure that you give them all a big hug from me. And until next time, happy bonsai.